The hotel lobby was bright and busy. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting soft light over the marble floors. The smell of fresh flowers mixed with the scent of polished wood and coffee. Guests walked by in elegant dresses and expensive suits, talking in soft voices. Waiters and waitresses moved quickly, carrying trays of drinks and appetizers, making sure everyone was served. Among them was a young woman who had been working here for years. She moved quietly, keeping her head down, going from table to table. Most people didn't notice her, and that suited her just fine. She liked being invisible. Her uniform was simpler, plain black vest and white shirt, with her hair tied neatly at the back. She had a small name tag, but most people didn't bother to look at it. They just saw a waitress, someone to bring drinks and clear plates. She had learned long ago that people didn't care about her dreams or her past. It was easier to hide them. She was good at her job, moving quickly and carefully, never making mistakes. She knew how to smile politely, how to respond with quiet words, and how to disappear when someone wanted her to. As she walked across the lobby, she saw a group of men talking about business deals. They laughed and nodded, completely absorbed in their own world. She brought them drinks, set the glasses down without a sound, and moved on. No one thanked her. No one noticed how carefully she balanced the tray or how quietly she stepped to avoid making a sound. That was the way it always was. She had learned to expect nothing, to want nothing, and to hide who she really was. In the quiet moments between tables, her mind drifted. She thought about the piano she had once played long before this job became her life. She remembered sitting on the wooden bench in a small, sunlit room, fingers dancing over the keys, music filling the space. The notes had been her voice when she had no one to talk to, her way to express feelings she could not put into words. She had been good, really good, and for a short time. She had dreamed of performing for a real audience, of sharing her music with people who would understand, but life had a way of changing dreams. Family troubles, money problems, and hard times had pulled her away from music. She had to find work, survive, and she had taken the first job she could. The piano had been put away, hidden under dust and memories, and she had learned to keep herself small. No one here would understand her talent. She had stopped hoping that anyone ever would. The lobby continued to hum with activity. Guests walked past, some looking at their phones, some chatting quietly. A young child ran past, laughing, chased by a parent. The sound made her smile for a moment, a small warmth in her chest. She stopped to help an older woman carry a heavy bag to a chair, and the woman gave her a polite nod. It was nothing extraordinary, but it was enough to make her feel like someone saw her. Just a little dot in the corner of the lobby, there was a grand piano. It was polished black and gleamed under the lights. Most guests ignored it, thinking it was just decoration. She often walked past it without a second thought, but today she looked at it and felt a small tug in her chest. She remembered how her fingers had felt on keys, just like these, how the music had come alive when she played. She shook her head, trying to push the thought away. There was work to do, trays to carry, tables to clean. There was no place for dreams here. The hotel manager walked by, checking on the staff. He gave a quick nod, and she responded with a polite smile. He didn't know anything about her past or her hidden talent. No one did. She kept it that way. It was safer to be invisible than to risk being disappointed again. She had learned that the world was quick to dismiss people like her, slow to recognize what they could do. Guests moved into the dining area for the evening event. The tables were set with fine china and sparkling glasses. The waitstaff hustled to bring out the food to make sure everything was perfect. She carried a tray of hors d'oeuvres, stepping carefully between the tables, listening to the soft music already playing from the speakers. The sound was pleasant, but it lacked soul. She longed for a fleeting moment to replace it with something real, something alive. She paused near a table of guests, listening to their laughter. They were talking about art, travel, and business. She noticed how they gestured with their hands, how they leaned in when someone said something clever. It all seemed so distant from her life, so far removed from the world she had once dreamed of joining. And yet part of her wished she could reach out and touch it, make them feel something real, not just polite conversation. As the night went on, she worked tirelessly. She refilled drinks, cleared plates, and answered questions with quiet efficiency. Her arms ached, her feet were sore, but she did not complain. She had grown used to exhaustion being a part of life. She moved like a shadow, present but unnoticed, part of the background of luxury and elegance. There was a moment when she paused. Catching her reflection in a polished silver tray, she looked at herself and barely recognized the young woman staring back. The tired eyes, the careful smile, the hidden strength. She thought about the piano again, about the music that had once been her companion, her voice. She touched the tray lightly, as if it were a keyboard, and imagined the notes flowing under her fingers. The thought made her heart beat faster, a mix of fear and longing. She had almost forgotten the joy it brought, the way it made her feel alive. The evening continued. Guests moved to the ballroom for a special gathering. The waitstaff followed, carrying food and drinks. She moved with practiced grace, always careful to stay out of the way, to avoid drawing attention. But she noticed the piano in the corner of the ballroom, a larger and more magnificent instrument than the one in the lobby. Its black surface gleamed, its keys waiting silently. Something stirred inside her, a memory she had kept buried. She remembered the first time she had played in front of someone. The way their eyes had widened in surprise, the way applause had felt like sunlight on her skin. That memory made her chest tighten. She shook her head, trying to focus on her work. She poured champagne into glasses, handed hors d'oeuvres to a group of guests, and moved on. But the piano called to her quietly, a soft voice that reminded her of who she had been and who she could still be. She had promised herself long ago that she would not risk being hurt by the world again, that she would stay invisible and safe. But the memory of the music was strong, and it made her question that promise. As the guests settled into their seats, she took a deep breath and reminded herself that this was not her world, not her stage. She was a waitress, invisible and quiet, moving through a world that would never know her true self. And yet somewhere deep inside, a small spark remained. A spark that remembered the joy, the freedom, and the beauty of music. She did not know how long it had been since she had felt that spark, but it made her feel alive in a way that nothing else had in years. She carried another tray of drinks. Walking past the piano and imagining the notes she could play, she did not dare touch it, not yet. But she could feel its presence like a promise waiting in the air. The night went on, full of laughter, clinking glasses, and soft conversation. She moved through it all, invisible yet aware, her heart quietly stirring with memories she thought she had buried. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to remember the girl who had loved music, the one who had once dreamed of playing in front of a real audience. And she felt, for a brief, shining moment, that perhaps those dreams were not entirely gone. The evening in the ballroom grew more crowded and lively. Guests arrived dressed in elegant gowns and sharp suits. The air smelled of perfume, cologne, and delicious food. Crystal glasses clinked as servers moved quickly among the tables. The young waitress worked tirelessly, carrying trays, refilling drinks, and answering polite questions with quiet smiles. She had done this so many times that her movements were almost automatic. Like a dancer following steps she had memorized long ago, music played softly from the speakers. A pleasant background melody, but it lacked feeling. She passed by the grand piano in the corner and felt a pang in her chest. It was beautiful, shining under the warm lights, its polished surface reflecting the elegant room. Her fingers itched to touch the keys, to feel the music flow through her once more. But she shook her head, telling herself she was just a waitress, invisible and unimportant, and that there was no place for her dreams here. As the guests settled, the manager approached her, worry written across his face. He whispered hurriedly that the pianist scheduled for the night had not arrived due to an emergency. The young waitress froze for a moment, her heart skipping a beat. The thought of someone noticing her talent, even by accident, terrified her. Yet a part of her felt a spark of hope, a small, dangerous excitement. She remembered how it felt to play for people who actually listened, who were moved by the music, even if just for a moment. But that was long ago, and the world had taught her to hide. The manager turned away, muttering about what to do. Guests were beginning to murmur among themselves, some tapping their glasses, some looking around expectantly. The atmosphere became tense. The soft music from the speakers could not hold their attention any longer. The young waitress carried a tray of drinks past the piano and almost tripped over her own thoughts. She ward the black-polished instrument toward the possibility of being heard, of being seen. Her feet moved slowly, almost against her will, toward the piano. Guests continued their chatter, not yet aware of what was about to happen. She felt their eyes briefly brush over her, some in surprise, some still amused by the earlier joke. The manager noticed her hesitation and whispered again, "Can you play something?" "Anything." His eyes were pleading. He didn't know the truth of her past or her skill, only that she might be able to save the night. She took a deep breath, shaking, and lifted the piano bench. Her fingers hovered over the keys, remembering the feel of them, the sound of each note. The music that had once lived in her hands. She pressed a single key lightly, testing, listening. The note rang out pure and clear, and something inside her stirred, a mixture of fear, excitement, and longing. She looked around at the crowd, their laughter fading as they noticed her at the piano. Some guests whispered, some raised eyebrows, curiosity replacing amusement. The first few notes she played were cautious, simple, as if she were testing herself. But the sound felt right, natural, and her confidence grew. She closed her eyes and let her memory guide her, her hands moving over the keys like they had a life of their own. The music started to fill the room, gentle at first, like a whisper, then more confident. Flowing through the air, touching every corner, the murmurs of conversation faded, replaced by silence. Guests turned toward her, eyes wide, unsure at first, then captivated. She felt the energy in the room shift. The piano became an extension of her soul, and the invisible walls she had built around herself began to crumble. She remembered how it felt to play when she had been younger, how music had been her voice when no one else listened. Every note she played carried a piece of her past, her struggles, her hopes, her hidden talent. She had thought she had lost it all, but now it was coming back, alive and strong. Guests who had once laughed now leaned forward, listening intently. Some of the wealthy elite crowd exchanged glances, surprised and impressed by the unexpected brilliance. The young waitress kept her eyes closed, lost in the music, feeling a warmth she hadn't felt in years. The piano carried her emotions, her fear, her joy, her longing, and the room responded. She realized she had the power to command attention without words, to make people pause and feel something real. Her performance grew, not planned but natural, flowing from her heart. The notes danced lightly, then built into a stronger rhythm, weaving a story that only music could tell. She had not intended to play like this. She had not imagined the impact she could have. But the piano seemed to guide her hands, and the audience responded with awe, silence, and wonder. She felt a deep connection to the room, to the people who had ignored her all night, now drawn into the beauty of her hidden gift. When the final notes lingered in the air, there was a moment of stillness. The guests blinked, as if waking from a dream. Slowly, one person began to clap, then another, until the applause filled the room. The young waitress opened her eyes, startled, unsure if it was real. She had imagined applause before, but never like this. The manager smiled broadly, pride and relief shining on his face. The invisible girl, the quiet waitress, had captured the attention of everyone. And for the first time, in a long time, she felt seen. Truly seen, she lowered her hands from the keys, her heart still racing, her mind spinning with disbelief and joy. She had stepped into the light without intending to, and it had changed everything. The laughter, the mockery, the doubt, all gone, replaced with admiration and respect. Guests approached her, complimenting her skill, some almost speechless, others unable to hide their surprise. She responded with quiet gratitude, still not used to the attention, still learning to believe in herself. For the first time in years, she realized that hiding had not made her safe. It had only kept her from sharing what she loved. The music had reminded her of who she was, of the talent she had almost buried, and of the courage she carried deep inside. She looked at the grand piano once more, touched its smooth surface lightly, and felt a connection she had almost forgotten. The room had shifted around her, and she knew that this moment would stay with her forever. A turning point in a life that had long been quiet and hidden. Even as the applause continued, she felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense of freedom. She had faced fear, stepped forward, and allowed herself to be vulnerable. The piano had been her voice. And in that voice, she had found strength, recognition, and a spark that could never be taken away. The guests, once unaware of her presence, now looked at her differently. The invisible waitress had become something incredible, and the world, for a brief shining moment, had stopped to notice. The room was silent now, filled only with the sound of the piano. The young waitress had closed her eyes, letting the music flow from her hands. Each note was full of emotion, carrying years of hidden talent and unspoken feelings. She had not planned what she would play, but her fingers moved as if guided by memory, its instinct, and the deep desire to be heard. She felt alive in a way she had not felt in years. The guests sat in stunned silence, unsure how to react at first. The laughter that had filled the room moments before was gone, replaced by an almost tangible awe. Eyes widened, jaws dropped slightly, and even the most elegant and composed faces betrayed surprise. People shifted in their seats, leaning forward, drawn into the music. The young waitress had no idea she had such power to make strangers stop in their tracks. To hold their attention so completely, her hands moved faster now, confident and free. She had forgotten her fear, forgotten the years of hiding. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a bridge, a way to connect her hidden world with the audience. The notes rose and fell, soft and gentle one moment, bold and powerful the next. It was as if she was telling her story through sound, sharing her struggles, her dreams, her long-suppressed voice. Some guests whispered to each other, exchanging glances of disbelief. "Can she really play like this?" one asked quietly. Another shook their head in wonder. The elegance of the event, the wealth, the statuses, all faded into the background. For a moment, it was just her and the music, and everyone present felt it, whether they admitted it or not. The young waitress had captured the hearts of a room that had once ignored her. Her mind drifted back to her childhood, to the days when she had first touched a piano. She remembered the warmth of sunlight in the small room where she practiced, the encouragement from a teacher who had believed in her talent, and the first time she had played a piece perfectly. That memory fueled her fingers now, giving her strength and precision. Each chord she played carried a piece of her past. A piece of who she was before the world told her to be quiet and invisible. The applause that followed each phrase was quiet at first, almost hesitant, but it grew steadily. People began to realize that what they were witnessing was rare and extraordinary. The young waitress noticed the subtle change in the room's energy. Guests who had been skeptical, even mocking, now looked at her with admiration. Some were leaning forward, eyes shining. Others had tears glistening as the beauty of the music reached them in ways words never could. Her performance was no longer just about the notes. It was about connection. She felt the room listening, feeling, responding to her story. The piano keys were an extension of her own emotions, and the audience became part of it, vibrating with the music. Each crescendo and soft passage was a conversation without words, a bridge between her hidden life and the world outside. The young waitress had not realized she could play this freely in front of an audience. She had always hidden, always doubted herself, always thought the world would reject her talent. But now, with each chord, she discovered that her music had the power to hold attention, to make people stop, to make them feel. The fear that had weighed her down for years melted away, replaced with exhilaration, pride, and a deep, joyful relief. Some guests could not hide their astonishment. One leaned over to whisper to another, "I never expected this from a waitress. She plays like a professional." Others simply shook their head in wonder, eyes still fixed on her hands. The laughter from earlier was now a distant memory. The room had been transformed by her music, the way her hands moved across the keys, the way her expression and posture conveyed her story. She allowed herself to smile slightly. though still focused on the keys. For the first time, she felt the recognition she had longed for silently. The approval that mattered not for fame or money, but for the acknowledgement of her true self. Her fingers glided effortlessly, and she lost track of time. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. A world apart from the mundane duties of serving food and drinks. The music shifted, softer now, more intimate. She played slower, each note deliberate, painting pictures of her quiet struggles, her hopes, and her hidden dreams. Some guests felt their hearts tugged, emotions stirred that they had not expected to feel. The piano became a storyteller, and she was the narrator, weaving her life into melodies and harmonies that transcended words. A few guests, influential and elite, exchanged knowing looks. They realized they had stumbled upon someone exceptional, someone whose talent had gone unnoticed simply because she had been invisible. Their whispers spoke of opportunities, of shows, of recognition. Imagined the first note, the way it would float through the room, silencing the chatter. She imagined the gasp of surprise, the quiet attention turning toward her. The idea frightened her more than it excited her. A group of guests sitting near the piano laughed quietly when one of them jokingly suggested, "Why don't we let the waitress play? She's been so busy running around anyway." The laughter grew, playful but mocking. The young waitress froze in her tracks, her tray trembling slightly in her hands. Her face heated, and she instinctively wanted to retreat, to disappear completely. She had been invisible for so long, and the thought of standing out, even for a moment, felt dangerous. Still, the piano seemed to call her. She could almost hear the keys whispering her name, reminding her of all the hours she had spent practicing, the countless moments she had poured her soul into music, the way it had been her companion when nothing else made sense. She set the tray down carefully on a nearby table, her heart racing. Every part of her told her to run, to stay hidden. But another, stronger part pulled her too. But she was too immersed in the moment to hear it fully. She played not for fame or reward, but because she had been called to do so. Because the music demanded it. Her hands moved faster again, more confident, more daring. The notes danced, flew, and dipped, creating a tapestry of sound that filled every corner of the ballroom. The young waitress was no longer just a server. She was an artist, commanding attention without a word. Each note was precise, yet full of feeling, controlled, yet wild with emotion. The elite crowd, once so distant, now leaned forward in fascination, captivated by the sudden brilliance before them. Time seemed to blur. The young waitress lost herself in the music, forgetting everything else, the laughter, the jokes, the invisibility she had always carried. Her talent had always been there, waiting for the right moment, waiting for courage to emerge. Now it had found that moment, and she embraced it fully, letting the music flow naturally. Without hesitation, when the final notes rang out, they lingered in the air, a delicate echo that seemed to wrap the entire room in warmth. There was a pause, almost imperceptible, as the guests realized the performance had ended. Then, slowly, applause began, soft at first, growing into a thunderous sound that filled the room. People rose from their seats, some clapping, some cheering, others simply staring, wide-eyed, still processing what they had witnessed. The young waitress blinked, overwhelmed by the reaction. She had expected disbelief, maybe polite applause, but this was something beyond her imagination. Guests approached her, complimenting her skill, some almost unable to speak. The manager came forward, beaming with pride and relief. Knowing she had saved the night and elevated it to something extraordinary, she lowered her hands from the piano keys. Feeling a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration, her heart raced, but a quiet joy settled in her chest. For the first time in years, she had let the world see her true self. The invisible waitress had become something incredible. It's not because she sought attention, but because she had finally embraced who she was. The music had revealed her, and in doing so, had changed the perception of everyone present. As the guests continued to talk and praise her, she felt a quiet, growing confidence. The piano had been her voice, and in using it, she had discovered strength she thought she had lost. She realized that her talent, long hidden, had the power to move people, to inspire awe, to touch hearts. The experience had awakened a determination within her, promised that she would no longer remain invisible, that her music would be heard whenever it was needed. The ballroom was alive with admiration, respect, and wonder, and she stood at the piano, quietly acknowledging the applause, feeling a connection that went beyond the simple act of playing. She had faced fear, embraced her talent, and changed the room forever. The invisible waitress had become incredible, and the memory of this night would stay with her, a turning point in a life that had long been hidden in the shadows. The applause had barely started to fade when she began again, letting the music flow without hesitation. Her hands moved over the keys like they belonged there, as if the piano and she were one. The notes carried her emotions fully, and the room responded. Every guest, from the most casual observer to the most critical, leaned in, drawn by the depth of feeling she was expressing. The music was no longer just a performance. It was a conversation, a story told without words, yet understood by everyone in the room. She remembered the small lessons from her early years, the hours spent practicing in quiet rooms, her teacher's gentle corrections, and the exhilaration of finally mastering difficult pieces. Now, all that training, all those memories, came alive in her hands. She played with confidence, with grace, and with emotion. The piano became her voice, and the audience became her listeners, sharing in her journey of struggle, resilience, and beauty. The young waitress felt a thrill she had never known in her work as a server. The energy of the room, the attention of the crowd, and the sound of the piano all merged into one sensation that made her heart race. She played with power and delicacy, shifting seamlessly between soft, tender passages and bold, commanding sections. The music carried her story, the invisible girl who had learned to hide, who had suffered and doubted, now shining brightly for all to see. Some guests closed their eyes, lost in the music. Others leaned forward, mesmerized by the skill and emotion flowing from her fingers. The laughter that had marked the beginning of the night had vanished completely. In its place was awe, admiration, and something deeper, an understanding that what they were witnessing was extraordinary. The young waitress had transformed from invisible server to commanding artist, and it was impossible for anyone in the room to ignore. The music swelled, filling the large ballroom with waves of sound that seemed to carry her emotions directly to the audience. She had not intended to make such an impact, but as she played, she realized the power of her talent. The notes flowed effortlessly, each one carrying pieces of her past. The long hours of practice, the moments of doubt, the dreams she had almost abandoned. It was all there in her hands, in the rise and fall of every chord. In the trembling, yet precise touch of each key, a few guests exchanged whispered comments, astonished by the depth of feeling in the performance. "I have never heard anything like this," one said softly, almost afraid to break the spell. Another nodded, eyes wide with amazement, unable to look away from the young waitress and the piano. The music had captured their hearts and minds, silencing their usual chatter and replacing it with something far more powerful: respect and wonder. She continued, letting her emotions guide her fingers, allowing each note to resonate with honesty. The young waitress had never felt more alive. Every chord, every melody was an expression of her true self. She had spent years hiding, thinking her dreams and her talent were unimportant. But now, in this room filled with people who had ignored her for so long, she had found her voice. The piano became her ally, her friend, and her confessor. Through it, she shared a part of herself that had remained hidden for too long. As she played, she noticed subtle changes in the audience. Eyes that had been skeptical or bored were now filled with emotion. Some people reached out to each other, sharing glances of awe. A few discreetly dabbed at their eyes, moved by the music, in ways they had not expected. She realized that the piano was more than an instrument. It was a bridge between her inner world and the hearts of everyone present. Her fingers flew over the keys, executing complex passages with both precision and feeling. She had not thought she would be able to play this way under the pressure. But the adrenaline and the connection to the audience fueled her performance. The music was alive, vibrant, and powerful, and she could feel it coursing through her veins. She had become more than a waitress. She had become an artist, commanding attention without needing words or recognition. The room seemed to hold its breath as she transitioned into a softer, more intimate section. The notes were delicate, almost whispering, yet full of meaning. It was as if she were speaking directly to each listener, telling them her story and inviting them to feel what she felt. Some guests leaned closer, captivated by the subtlety and emotion. Realizing that the young woman before them was capable of expressing depths they had never expected, the invisible girl had become someone they could not ignore. She paused for a moment, letting a single note linger in the air. The silence that followed was heavy, almost reverent. The audience waited, holding their breath, as if afraid to disturb the delicate connection she had created. Then she continued, gradually building the music into a crescendo that filled the room with energy and life. The piano roared softly, carrying every emotion she had bottled up for years. The audience responded instinctively, leaning forward, clapping softly along with the rhythm. Completely absorbed, her hands moved faster, more daring, exploring the piano with skill and confidence. She realized that the music was no longer just for the audience, it was for herself as well. Each note released a weight she had carried silently. Each chord lifted a fear that had held her back. The young waitress had stepped into a new version of herself, one that was brave, visible, and full of potential. The piano had given her a way to claim her place in the world, even if just for a moment. Guests who had been the loudest skeptics were now completely captivated. Their polite, detached expressions were gone, replaced by wonder and admiration. Some whispered to each other, trying to comprehend how someone they had barely noticed could play with such skill and emotion. The music had transformed their perception of her, and in that transformation, they found themselves moved in ways they had not anticipated. The young waitress had achieved what few performers could. She had made them feel as the final notes approached. She allowed herself to slow down, to savor each sound, each vibration. The room was quiet, every ear attuned to the piano and the young woman who had once been invisible. She played with care and precision, knowing that the last notes would leave a lasting impression. When the final chord resonated, it lingered in the air like a gentle caress. Wrapping around the hearts of everyone present, the audience sat in stunned silence for a moment, as if waking from a dream. Then the applause erupted, first softly, then growing into a thunderous sound that filled the ballroom. People rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, and some even wiping tears from their eyes. The young waitress lowered her hands slowly, overwhelmed by the response. She had done it. She had shared her talent, her story, and her heart. And the world had finally noticed. The manager approached, his face beaming with pride. Guests came forward to compliment her, some shaking her hand, others simply staring in awe. She felt a warmth in her chest, a feeling she had not known in years. The invisible waitress had become incredible, not through ambition or showmanship, but through courage and honesty. The music had revealed her true self, and in doing so, had touched the hearts of everyone present. As the applause continued, she glanced at the grand piano, running her fingers lightly over the keys. The connection she had felt was real, and it had changed everything. She realized that this night was a turning point, a moment where her hidden talent had been recognized and appreciated. The world had finally seen her, not as a server, not as invisible, but as someone capable of greatness. The young waitress took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of relief, pride, and joy. The music had carried her beyond fear and self-doubt, beyond the invisible life she had once known. She had embraced her gift, shared it with the world, and discovered that she was capable of far more than she had imagined. The audience had been transformed by her performance, and she, in turn, had been transformed by their recognition and awe. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to dream again. The invisible girl had become someone remarkable, and the piano had shown her the way. She knew that this night would remain with her forever, a memory of courage, talent, and the power of embracing who you truly are. The applause that followed her final note was thunderous. Filling the ballroom with energy and astonishment, the young waitress lowered her hands from the keys, her heart racing and her mind spinning. She could hardly believe what had just happened. Moments ago, she had been invisible, just another server in a busy room. Now, she was the center of attention, the focus of every pair of eyes. The transformation was overwhelming, yet deeply satisfying. She took a slow, steadying breath, trying to absorb the enormity of the moment. Guests were standing, clapping, cheering, and some were even whistling in admiration. The room buzzed with excitement and amazement. The wealthy elite crowd that had once ignored her were now fully captivated, their faces reflecting genuine respect and awe. Some leaned forward, eager to offer compliments, while others simply stared, still absorbing the brilliance of her performance. It was a moment of recognition unlike anything she had ever experienced. The manager hurried toward her, his face glowing with pride and relief. He had seen her talent in private, but witnessing it command the attention of the entire ballroom was something else entirely. "You are incredible," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "I knew you had it in you, but I never imagined it would be like this." She nodded quietly, still overwhelmed, her hands brushing over the piano keys as if to reassure herself that it was real. The sound, the energy, the attention, all of it was hers in that moment. Guests approached her, their faces a mix of surprise, respect, and wonder. One of the older gentlemen, a frequent visitor known for his critical eye, extended his hand. "That was remarkable," he said simply. "You have a gift that deserves to be shared more widely." Another guest, a woman in an elegant gown, smiled warmly. "I have never seen anything like it. You played with heart, soul, and mastery. Thank you for sharing your music with us." She felt a warm glow inside, the kind that comes from being truly seen and appreciated. For the first time in years, she realized that her talent could not remain hidden, as the crowd continued to speak in hushed tones. The young waitress felt a sense of calm wash over her. She had faced her fear, stepped into the spotlight, and shared something deeply personal. The music had carried not just notes, but her story, her struggles, her hidden dreams. And the world had listened. The invisible girl had become visible, and the power of her performance was undeniable. She allowed herself a small, triumphant smile. After a few moments, the room began to settle. Guests returned to their seats, conversations slowly resuming, but the energy was different now. There was a lingering sense of wonder, a recognition that something extraordinary had occurred. People spoke quietly among themselves, still processing the performance, still inspired by the courage and skill that had emerged from someone they had overlooked. The young waitress realized that she had not only captured attention, but had also changed the perception of those around her. The manager returned, motioning for her to step aside. He whispered, "There are people who want to meet you, opportunities you might not have imagined. This could be the beginning of something amazing." She nodded, her mind racing with possibilities, though she remained grounded. Fame and recognition were new to her, but she felt ready to explore them carefully. The music had given her confidence, a sense of self-worth that no applause could fully capture. And she understood that this was only the beginning. She spent the next few moments moving among the guests, receiving congratulations and kind words. Each interaction reinforced the realization that she was more than just a server. She was a musician, an artist, and someone who had the power to move hearts. The experience was surreal yet deeply validating. For years, she had hidden in the background, content to be unnoticed. Now, she understood that her talent could not remain hidden forever. The night continued, but for her it was different. Every step she took, every tray she carried, was accompanied by a new sense of purpose and confidence. The piano performance had changed not only the perception of others, but also her perception of herself. She had faced fear, embraced vulnerability, and allowed her true self to shine. That courage, more than the applause, was what mattered most. She had discovered that the invisible could become incredible. And that discovery was life-changing as the event drew to a close. She returned to the piano once more, lightly touching the keys. The familiar feel of the instrument beneath her fingers brought a sense of comfort and continuity. The music had always been part of her, waiting patiently for the right moment to emerge. Now it had found that moment, and she had embraced it fully. The piano was not just an instrument. It was a companion, a witness to her growth, and a bridge to a future filled with possibilities. Later, when the ballroom was quiet and the last guests had departed, she remained at the piano, reflecting on the night. She thought about the years she had spent hiding, about the doubts and fears that had kept her from pursuing her passion. But she also thought about the courage it had taken to step forward, to trust herself, and to share her gift. That courage had opened a door, one that could lead to a life where her talent was recognized, appreciated, and celebrated. She knew that opportunities would come, some expected and some surprising. Offers to perform, invitations to collaborate, and chances to showcase her music would begin to appear. But beyond all of that, she felt a deeper transformation, a belief in herself, a recognition of her worth, and a renewed sense of purpose. The invisible waitress had become someone extraordinary, not because the world had changed, but because she had found the strength to reveal her true self. The young waitress left the ballroom that night with a sense of fulfillment she had never known. The echoes of the applause and the warmth of the audience's admiration stayed with her, carrying a promise of new beginnings. She had discovered that her talent was a gift not only to herself, but to the world, and that sharing it could transform not only her life, but also the lives of those who listened in the days that followed. She continued her work at the hotel, but everything had changed. Guests who had witnessed her performance now treated her with newfound respect. Some recognized her on sight, offering smiles and words of appreciation. Yet even as the attention grew, she remained grounded, understanding that the true reward was not the recognition but the rediscovery of her own voice and the courage to use it.